to the
I'm
clouds.
sorry.
Okay, we're recording.
Okay. Were you about to say something else? Okay. All right. So let's get to it. It's 3:30. We have one more hour. What the first part we're going to speak into was around opening up. So a big part of building your erotic foundation is opening up to the erotic energy. That's.
Oh, wait, we were going to talk about what do we mean by erotic?
Oh, yes. You were going to go for that. You do that.
So the question often comes up, what does erotic mean? What do we mean by erotic? Isn't that just the same as sexual? Isn't the sexual the same as sensual? Like, aren't all those things the same? And so what I generally like to do is to ask folks what they think about that. Do they think that the erotic and the sexual and the sensual are the same? And if they're not the same, how would they define the differences between them? Does anyone want to take that? Yeah, no?
Wait, ask it one more time.
Sexual, sensual, and the erotic, are those all the same? And if they're different, what is the difference between them?
I'm just going to go and take just a wild leap and just say that I do see them as distinct qualities. And for me, sensual is directly connected to the senses, how things feel, what things look like, what you hear. It is having, I think, a pleasurable, however you define that, experience through your senses is what sensuality is. And I think sexual, well, I guess I try to distinguish it from erotic as I believe, and I'm very influenced by, Audre Lorde's essay, that it's coming from a place of power. That the difference between something being erotic and sexual is that the erotic is rooted in its power and sexual doesn't have to be. And it doesn't have to be through the senses. The brain is a big old sexual organ. And I mean, so it's hard for me to define them independent of each other, or in a way that's not really like heavily edited in my head politically, but I do see them as different.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Carolyn?
That's a big question. I'm almost positive that they are not the same, but I could not give as definitive or a definitive answer or a more long form answer, but I don't think they are the same, no.
Okay. Well, I have a definition that I've been working from, a work in progress that I've been working with for the past 10 years. And I just recently sort of changed it a little bit a couple of years ago. So I do see them as distinct, and this is how I distinguish them. And I always say, if what I say seems to work for you or click for you, feel free to use it. And if it sounds like garbage, then to toss it. So how I define the sensual is very much like what Black Kyrie said. I see the sensual as anything that is stimulation of or pleasing to any of the senses. And my definition of the sexual is very interesting. I've had discussions with people where they feel like my definition of the sexual is very limiting, but that's because I feel like they're not clocking for the erotic. So my definition of the sexual is anything that is pleasing to or any stimulation of the erogenous zones and or the genitalia with one or more of the following as goals. So communication or connection and or orgasm. And then I see the erotic as anything which is pleasing to or stimulation of the soul. And how they're related is that I believe that the sexual and the sensual are the most embodied and the quickest routes to get to the soul. So that's how I see them all intertwined. I like this idea about power because I wasn't necessarily, I wasn't thinking about them in terms of power more so in terms of, I do think Audre Lorde has a, quote where it's like, it's the erotic is the life force. It's the deepest, most primal energy that we have. And so the life force, the creative force, the soul, and it's just the easiest way. A lot of traditional religions try to separate the soul or the spirit, that you have to sort of reject the body in order to achieve a spiritual plane. And I really believe like that's bass backwards, that you actually need to engage the body, engage the meat, engage the senses to get the quickest bang for your buck and get to the soul. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the we're not necessarily not dealing with orgasm and genitalia, but I think we're more talking about that life force, that creative force, that connection to spirit that includes all of those things if you are a sexual person, and not, as we know, not everyone is.
Mm-hmm. Right, because the erotic energy still flows through you even if you are not a sexual person.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So
how do we open ourselves up to that erotic energy, Maisha?
Yes, so there are several ways that we open up to erotic energy, and some of you may have already experienced these things, but for us, we really believe strongly that you sort of need this foundation in order to open up to it, or at least to start moving toward these areas. And one of them is, the first one we want to talk about is being vulnerable. In order for you to connect with it, to connect with others, especially, and to connect with spirit, it is really about being vulnerable, opening it up to your own vulnerability. I'll just name them and then we'll talk about them. The other is about being present in your mind, in your body, which again, being vulnerable sort of lends itself to that. So when you're vulnerable and open yourself up, then you are able to start moving toward becoming more present in the mind, in the body, and in the intuitive mind, and the heart and the body. So the other is being available and open to spiritual, esoteric connections, to just sort of the overall sense that there's something here greater than us, even if that something is the earth or, the stars above. It doesn't have to be religious or a god or anything like that. It just has to be a sense that there is something bigger, a bigger connection, something higher. And then also being ready and open to learning about yourself, the things you consider good about yourself, as well as the things you consider that you don't like about yourself. It's about opening to all of the aspects of the self. So when it comes to being vulnerable, I wanted to ask, like, how do people see vulnerability in their lives today? Like today in your life right now, in this moment, how does vulnerability show up in your life? Where do you feel like you are allowed to be vulnerable, like that you allow yourself to be vulnerable and that you allow others to be vulnerable with you?
Well, another wildly, I'm an introvert, so I do my best to be my ears. But what I immediately think about is structural vulnerability, just being a Black, queer, middle-aged woman. Just, there's enough said. But in terms of the vulnerability that I can control, and I guess I'm thinking of it weirdly in those terms, there's a couple of things. One is I'm empathetic, so I feel like there's some vulnerability I can't control in terms of other people's energy. But in terms of the engagement that I feel like I have a direction in, I'm closer to my good friends. I feel like there's certain circles in my life, people who rode with me for decades, that I can call up and say, I have an issue, I have a problem. I seek that kind of vulnerability with my partners. But then I guess I have to flip back to the fact that I am an introvert, I am shy, and I tend to be more observational before I'm open. And it doesn't work very well trying to be a poet who's trying to hit an open mic on a regular basis. It's forcing me to regularly exercise public trust in a way that I'm not necessarily used to all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If any of that makes sense.
Yes, all of that makes sense. And I see where, you know, there's a way that we can be vulnerable, but we have to, you know, choose it. It's about being boundaried too, like using our boundaries and knowing where our comfort lies, and being conscious of where you can be vulnerable in order to let energy in, let the energy that you want in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. Carolyn.
I tend to
I'm
be,
sorry.
Black Cowrie?
I'm really sorry. I'm sorry, Carolyn. I just was going to also just say that this is something that I feel like is a priority for me to work on, that I feel like vulnerability is key to my humanity, to my existence, and that I need to develop courage around this. I'm sorry, Carolyn. I just wanted to take it in.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think that because currently I'm working on building better boundaries, I tend to be vulnerable with everybody except for new partners, which is weird because I don't trust them. So I'm trying to learn how to have better boundaries while also being vulnerable at the same time. So it's a real process, a real serious process for me right now. Like I can't even, that's pretty much as I can say about it because it's seriously something I'm currently working on.
Yeah. Well, and like what, you know, what Black Cowrie was saying about the structural vulnerability, that some of that lends itself to the way that we boundary ourselves, right? You know, our experiences out in the world, our experiences in relationships, you know, that come from those structures. So yeah, I think sometimes it's actually a lot harder for many women of color to allow themselves to be vulnerable, allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And everyone, you know, when we get hurt, then we shut down, you know, and that starts from us being hurt in childhood, and then in other relationships, from relationship to relationship. And there's also this other level of vulnerability around allowing ourselves to be vulnerable to the energy of the universe and allowing that to come in too. Like, what does that feel like? Like, not just with people, but what does it feel like to open up and not know what's going to come in to our energy field?
I think that's interesting that you know, because I'm thinking about vulnerability and being open and how they're the same and how they're different. Because I feel like, well, one, I was thinking I actually didn't start being really vulnerable. I'm a Scorpio, first of all. Let's just put that. So I have a certain facade where I appear to be very aloof, but I'm actually kind of a mushball. But I did have, you know, I'm thinking about systemic issues. And I think a lot, when I think about vulnerability, I think a lot about my mother. And I think about the myth of the Black superwoman. And I think about how the lack of a world, women get punished by being vulnerable. Black women get punished for being vulnerable or get taken advantage of or get like just smushed down. And then we don't often have access to places or resource or places where we can expose our own vulnerability. And I think about how a lack of being able to find space to be vulnerable, even if it was with her partners, killed her, right? Like my mother died from survivor's guilt. And it took 20 years, but she died of survivor's guilt. And there was not a, you know, therapy wasn't really big in the 70s and 80s for Black people. That was some crazy thing that white people did. And her not feeling like she could share what was going on with her, that she had to be strong for me, she had to be strong for her family, the no good Nick that she ended up with was not really there for her vulnerability. So I think a lot about that, and then I think about how I am very choosy who I'm vulnerable with, and how that's changed now over the last 10 years, where I'm consciously being more vulnerable, like saying what my my deepest feelings are, and doing that in a really public way. Like I'm, bleeding all over my Facebook page daily. And there's a way that is vulnerable and a way that's not vulnerable, because I don't get, I can't see how that lands for people right away. I can't hear how that lands for people right away. And then I'm just going to say this one piece. One of my exes, we that's why they're the ex. But anyway, at one point they said to me, I forgot how they phrased it, but they were like, you are basically two different people. How you act out in the world, like you're all tough and blah, blah, you don't need nobody, but you're really not like that. And one, I was like, everybody is not worthy of my vulnerability. So no, when you first met me, I'm not going to be like, bleh, like just letting it all hang out. And number two, I get you were attracted to the fact that you thought you weren't going to have to do no emotional labor. And that's why you wanted to get with me. And now you realize you got to do some emotional labor and you're not down for it. Mm-hmm. But when I think about being open to other energy, that's something that I do, whenever I'm doing healing work with somebody, I'm opening myself up to the energy of the universe to move through me. And somehow I don't see those as being the same things. Mm-hmm. Although when my godmother is talking to me and her Orishas talk to her, like you can tell that she's actually like having a conversation. And I was like, I do not want that. I do not want other voices speaking to me in my head, because I come from a family with mental health issues, and that will make me feel like I would not be able to feel confident about whose voices those are in my head. And so that is a possibility of vulnerability that I've cut myself off from. I'm like, if I'm going to have a relationship with the Orishas, they need to communicate with me in some other way, because I'm not having other voices in my head. I'm not down for that. So.
Mm-hmm. And Black Cowrie, were you about to say something too?
I was, but sometimes my mouth moves faster than my consideration. I wasn't trying to cut off.
I can't hear you very well.
Can you speak up just a little bit?
Oh, I'm sorry. I said sometimes my mouth runs faster than my consideration, so I wasn't trying to cut off anything. But I was reacting. I spent a lot of time these days thinking about vulnerability, and I was trying to think about, Kali, what you were sussing out for yourself in terms of the distinction between open and vulnerable. And I was trying to, like I said, I'm empathetic, so sometimes I just guess at other people's thought processes. And I was thinking about, well, why would that be a distinction for me? And one, I think of open as maintaining its power. When someone says they're open, they're in control of that dynamic. I have opened these doors. These doors are not opened outside of me. And I think vulnerability, its definition or distinction has been much more skewed for different reasons. Because I think that people hear vulnerability, they don't hear it, that at its core, it maintains a sense of power.
Yes.
Right? And there's reasons for that. And I think that some of the reasons are that vulnerability, we're told that you need to push down vulnerability to survive. Mm-hmm. Like, I think if I'm guessing correctly, all of us come from African indigenous heritage, and we're told that through this enslavement system that from people who were surviving, that we needed to push down our vulnerability. So it's a defense strategy, but it's also something that maintains structural power. I'm radical, sorry. So it's good with those who oppress us. It's good with those who are trying to keep us breathing, to squash this vulnerability. And yet, I do still think it's the locus of our humanity, and it allows us to build intimacy and empathy and connection with each other is a source of power. And I think from that, I think about Brene Brown's video that she did very popularly on TED Talks. And that's where a lot of my understanding or sensibility around vulnerability is coming from. That if I put out what I'm most precious and tender with, you can't hurt me. You can't wound something that I find strength in, that I'm operating from a place of power within. So I'm trying to recode vulnerability as not being so different from open. But like I said, I was just thinking and talking and thinking. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I'm. That is where I align as around the vulnerability piece as well. So for me, growing up, I was the person who was very open and empath as a child, and all throughout my childhood, adulthood, 20s as well. And so I was constantly getting my feelings hurt, constantly. And Black people kept telling me, including people I would date, that I wasn't strong enough because of the fact that I would cry in public. I would be an open book, and I would talk about my feelings, and I was an oversharer and all of the things that apparently Black people are not supposed to be. So I was constantly getting beat down, like, you're not supposed to be like this, but I could not help it. And so I actually sort of took my trajectory around vulnerability has actually shifted to where I've learned how to actually have more boundaries, right? So I was like soft and smushy all the time, right? I was always soft and smushy, but then I realized that also wasn't coming from a place of power in the beginning, right? So I had to learn how to make it come from a place of power later, and not to listen to the people saying to me that I am not strong, right? And that I am actually strong by the fact that I can say what my emotions are, I can name them, I can share them with you, I can let you know how I'm feeling, why I'm feeling that way, and then we can talk about it and process it, and then I can use it also just for my own healing. So that is how I learned my trajectory of like vulnerability. It went like hugely to where, okay, now I know I've learned how to be, that I can't be vulnerable around everyone. Everyone is not safe to be vulnerable around. That was a tough one. And then also learning what my feelings were, because I would take on the feelings of everyone around me, everyone. And then I would take the blame for all of the feelings of everyone around me. And that was a challenge throughout my whole life, to understand that, oh, these feelings actually don't even belong to me. These don't belong to me. And so the process of doing my shamanic work, my therapy work, my tantric work, all of that has helped me to see where my vulnerability is powerful and where the trauma informed some of the old vulnerability, and how this vulnerability is still how I'm able to have sex and have intimacy with people, and still cry and feel and be open and all of those things, and also to transform my relationship with my ancestors, right? So my relationship with my ancestors is very intimate, because that's how I am in the world. And so when I have a spiritual experience, I have orgasms because I am so vulnerable and so open that I can feel the nature, the trees, the energy, the notes, the smells, sounds, and everything inside of my entire being. Like my whole body feels like it's being made love to. So for me, that is where the vulnerability is very powerful. And that's really important that you named that piece. There's the power piece around it, Black Cowrie. So yeah, that's how I see. I think they are two different things. Open and vulnerable are two different things, but they can merge.
What sign are you? I'm a Cancer.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
This is Maisha. I am a Sagittarius.
All right, so we'll get some water.
I'm a Sagittarius fire, yes, but I have a Scorpio, Venus, and Mars. My Venus and Mars is in Scorpio, and that's where I get that from. I know it. That's where all that water is. So, but did anyone have anything else to share about the vulnerability piece? We can move to the next.
I have a question.
Okay.
Which is, like I said, I've done a lot of thinking in terms of just trying to do my own growing up around what we've talked about so far. But I don't know if y'all are into any kind of Myers-Briggs, but I'm an INFJ, so I tend to be more intellectually comfortable with things than physically. There's like a mind-body disconnection that can happen because I am more into my own, I don't know, intuition, brain, cauldron, and disconnect from the body. So I feel like, oh, this is so cool. I can get into this plane, but how does that build that erotic foundation in that kind of neat sense that Kali was talking about, where it's not just about these nice, interesting ideas I can float in, but my nerve endings and my cells can also experience that kind of reverberation too. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we're gonna move into that. We're gonna talk about that.
Yes, we were going to talk about that, the being present piece, right? So it is also, it's about being present. A lot of times, you know, especially the thing is when we are people who think a lot and the logical mind is sort of our go-to. The reason it is challenging is because our society sort of lends itself to us constantly using our logical minds. So it's very easy and comfortable to be there for people who are logical, who stay in the mind a lot, in that active thinking brain. So it really is a part of learning to quiet the mind. It doesn't shut off. It never shuts off completely, right? But it's about learning to quiet the mind, right? Yes.
I don't think that's true. I think it does shut off. And I think a lot of times, you know, it's one of the reasons people self-medicate is to get the mind to shut the fuck up.
Yes.
And I know my brain is constantly, and so I self-medicate in a different way without using substances. The ways that I get my mind to shut up, because I need to have my mind shut up sometimes, because it's constantly going.
Yes.
So like, I can't do meditation, but when I'm working with a client, my mind is shut down because I have to be open. You know, in order to make myself a conduit, I have to shut my mind down because otherwise it's telling me shit.
Yes.
When I'm especially when I'm dancing to the Orishas, my brain is off. And then sex.
Yeah. And
I need those moments of having my brain shut down. Otherwise, I don't think I could cope. I'm sorry, I'm eating during this.
Well, yes, and it's the active brain. That's the part that you're wanting to shut off. Your brain is still working, clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still breathing and like my eyes are blinking and shit. But the thinking part.
Yes, the thinking part. So, and there's the part where the thinking part can be actively engaged, but in listening versus in speaking or thinking, right? So it can still actively engage in taking it in taking in listening, from listening to people, listening to spirit, listening. So that's why we're talking about retraining the brain. Like this next part we were going to talk about and move into was around how do you retrain your brain to receive this erotic pleasure? And one huge way that we talk about doing that is focusing on something else like breathing, meditation, movement. So M. Kali Hashiki talked about that, you know, when dancing or when doing work with other people and being sort of between the worlds, right? As you do that work and as you become a conduit. I enjoy breathing, doing breath work. And Kali Hashiki teaches erotic breath work. So we do breath work in a lot of the work that we do in order to get your mind to align with your body. So, and your heart and your spirit. So when they say mind, body, spirit connection, it really is about aligning those in the moment, right? And so I also do it with meditation, yoga, You can do it with trance dancing, where you're just dancing to music and letting your body do whatever it wants to do without thinking about how your body wants to do it. Mindful stretching or qigong, hiking, walking, like being in nature, even a walking meditation. There's actually a number of different kinds of meditation, and a lot of people only assume that meditation is only one kind, which is where you sit still and you're silent. But there's tons of different types of meditations that might lend itself to people whose mind moves more quickly, right? So one of the meditations I just gave a friend recently, because I teach a meditation class weekly at my local library, and they are loving the ones where you're doing mantras, because then you're not thinking, you're thinking about doing the mantras, and you're breathing in order to do the mantras, in order to sing. So you're, I don't know if you've heard of the Kirtan Kriya, but that's like Satanama, Satanama. And you do that several times while also moving your fingers and touching each finger. So doing something like that can center you, but still engage your mind so that you're not floating off and your mind's not thinking about a million different things. These are the kinds of ways, there's several of them, but these are the kinds of ways that you can begin to get out of the thinking mind more and allow your other mind, your third eye mind, to begin to take over in those moments, you know, whether it's for 15 minutes, an hour, you know, 15 minutes every morning, 5 minutes every morning. And one of the things that we talk about around movement is a lot of times, I've met people who assume that they're in their body because they exercise a lot, but that doesn't technically mean that you're in your body and present with your body, right? Being present in your body means like feeling that breath flowing through your body, being conscious of how your body feels in every moment, not necessarily flying away from your body, but staying present and grounded in the body. And you can also feel sort of in an altered state at the same time, but you're also aware at the same time. It's like a foot in both worlds. Is there any questions about that or thought? So does anyone have any kind of practices that they use on a regular basis to help them sort of center? It's basically about centering yourself so that you can feel.
I've started, you know, I have a bunch of body scans on my website, and it's an exercise that I give to all my clients. And so I've started doing them in the last month or so. And one, it's weird to try to do meditation to the sound of your own voice. That part is probably, but
for you,
for me,
yes.
I'm like, whoa, you sound weird. What's that? But the idea of checking in with the body every day, at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, is one way to sort of like, oh, my brain's been going all day, or I just woke up and my brain's not quite active yet. How can I sink into my body and become, you know, really conscious of what's going on in my body, and let my body know that I want to know what's going on with it? Because it's really about, in my mind, it's also about strengthening the muscle of connection with your body.
Yes.
And so for me, the scanning, which I guess could be it is a form of meditation, but it's really, for me, it's like the breath, bringing awareness to each part of my body, trying to figure out what it is that I feel, and all the different various definitions of feel, because feel can mean many things. And by I do a word for each part, so I can slip into the body's language to hear what the body is telling me about what it feels, but then I need to bring it back into language, so that now I'm engaging the conversation between my thinking brain and my body. So that's one thing that I find very helpful.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I do not, but I think that I really, really need to, especially dealing with crazy kids all day. Well, you know what? Actually, I mean, I think the closest that I have to a practice like that is I make sure that I get to school on time so I can sit there in my room with my door closed and get my mind together. So that is like the closest that I do have to that. I probably need to add an exit an exit meditation when I get rid of them at 6th period. No, seriously, because
Yes.
usually when they leave, I'll be all riled up. And usually when they do leave, I'm going straight from school to the gym. So I probably either because my prep period is the last period of school. So I probably need to start, doing a little meditating either on their way out or when I get to the gym or on the way to the gym. But I do take that time, not really when I get up, but when I get to school to just try and get myself ready for the day. So I guess so, yeah. I could do a little bit better at that, though.
Yeah. Well, and like you're saying, too, that's something you're purposefully, consciously doing, which really is the most important thing, is that you're doing it. All of those things, sort of like a ritual, right? And you're doing it consciously so that you can center yourself before and after school. So that's exactly what it is. I mean, you can make it anything you want. It doesn't have to be traditional meditation and things like that. It just has to be, okay, this feels meditative to me, whatever this is I'm doing in this moment. Or even like you said, when you're exercising at the gym, like paying attention to what you're doing during the exercise, and consciously feeling how your body is feeling during the exercise and how your endorphins are feeling, or, if it's bringing you joy, in this moment. Those kinds of things are ways to be in the body. Because one of the other things I did not mention was also this engaging the senses. That's a big part of, staying present, is engaging the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes in your everyday life can center you and keep you present.
I was thinking about it, and I think I have to ditto Carolyn, with the exception of having children. I feel like this is a big crux for me, the big challenge, the big draw for this discussion for me, of having that kind of presence and connection and awareness. And I was thinking about it, and I was thinking I try to fall into that alignment state or syncing state, mostly in an emergency kind of context. Like, I'm really upset. Let me just try to bring it all together. Not necessarily as a daily morning and evening thing. It's something that's come up for therapy with me very recently. So it's like, okay, the universe is saying you need to do this. Of starting and grounding the day and grounding my dream state every day. I think I actually spend a lot more time and energy in opposition to that, is what I was thinking about. It was like, I do tarot, but I feel like tarot is not necessarily drawing me more into my body, but it's drawing me more into my unconscious. I'm a stoner, but even though there's a sensual experience, it's drawn me, I still think, more into my subconscious than it is into my body. So I feel like, okay, maybe this is the area, which is why I didn't want to just start off talking, besides taking up too much space. But that maybe is the crux of what I have to focus on.
Mm. Oh, and that's a huge part of what we do, right? Because I think that's the hardest thing for a lot of us, in the beginning of building this erotic foundation is finding out how do I do this on a regular basis? Even if it's not daily, can I do it every other day but really it's developing practices, conscious practices to help you on a regular week, daily. So that's the kind of things that we teach at the retreats, at the workshops, and give you actual exercises, because that's a huge part of this. Is we're talking about it now because we're online, but there are actual embodiment practices that, just like yoga and all of those, yoga literally means a practice, right? So it is a practice. All of these things are a practice. So it's not really about judging ourselves, but it is about saying, okay, giving you tools So we're providing tools to help. Oh, okay, so I could do this, you know, like, well, this one doesn't work for me. What Mai's talking about is not working for me, but what my M. Kawahashiki talked about, that works. Like, let me try that. Let me try this. It's about trying all of these things. And then as you try them, being aware of how you respond to it, how your body responds, how your mind responds, how your soul responds, you know? So we're going to keep, you know, providing that kind of information through Sister Sanctuary.
Well, one of our teachers used to always say, I mean, this is in the particular tradition, particular lineage of Tantra that we were trained in. One of the principles is that everything is an experiment, and then you gather the data.
Yeah.
So you can be like, oh, I'm going to try this one, and now I'm going to gather the data. How did my body respond? How did I feel going through my day? Did it change how I interacted with people? Did it provide me more patience? Did it provide me less patience? How did it impact my libido? Oh, okay. So now I have this set of data here. I'm not thinking that one's going to work for me. Okay, let me try this other one. Oh, let me do the experiment. Let me gather the data. And the other thing to be really aware of as you're trying to build these practices is to be gentle with yourself. There's a whole science of how to create habits. And we try to tell, like, a lot of times we're like, okay, you have to start doing this thing and you need to do it every day. And if you don't do it every day, then like you're going to fail and it's never going to work. But there's like a whole like methodology of how you build practices into your life. So if you can say, oh, I've decided that 2018, I'm going to meditate every day. And then you get to February and you've only meditated like three times, doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It might mean that either that's not the thing that works for you, or you need to be you need more help around how to build an actual habit. And there's actually lots of stuff out there on the interweb about how to create habits. I forgot the guy in Stanford who does a thing, but there's lots of information out there around how to create habits and how to take a big habit that you want to do and how to break it into many habits so that you can build a chain. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to do meditation and you say you want to do it every day and you don't end up not doing it every day, don't beat yourself up about it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we want to, were there any other questions around this part before we
move to the next?
I mean, one thing that I heard is that meditation is not the end, but just the exercise of having to constantly correct the brain to come back into presence is supposed to be the point. Do you all agree with that? That it's not. I don't know if it's an article or a discussion, but they were talking about so many times some people like me get caught up in the fact that, okay, no, my brain didn't get quiet. It didn't last very long. This is not really working for me. I'm sorry, my voice is low and soft. But it's the course correction that is this actual exercise of meditation, of trying to discipline the mind to come back to state.
To answer your question, just my first thoughts about that is that it can be that. I mean, that can be part of it. And I think that meditation, like sort of the goal, may be different for each participant too, right? So I definitely see how that can be very helpful, because it's like learning lessons, right? That disciplining the mind. To me, it feels like a lesson that you're learning about yourself. Like that's sort of how I go through life though too, is that everything feels like a lesson to me. Okay, so this is what's happening. My mind's wants to keep taking over, so I'm going to keep practicing quieting it. But that could be the reason that some people do meditation and the goal. But I think there are so many multiple goals that can occur simultaneously or separately with meditation.
I appreciate your response, but then I was realizing as I was listening to you that I was just doing exactly the issue. So let me take us out of this intellectualization.
Yes.
Focusing on the practices. obviously I'm speaking from my real life. So
Yeah.
sorry about that. I didn't mean to derail. But
Oh no.
just engage. Yes, I got it. I don't have to completely have it all intellectually sorted out.
No, but it's good to ask the questions though too, you know.
Yeah, because we're questions are not only for the asker.
Yeah.
Questions also are for the other people listening and also for the answerer.
Yes.
Right? Like part of the reason that we wanted to record this, or when I was saying, oh, we want to record this, is like, yeah, we've written stuff that we want to say, but somebody might ask us a question that will spark something that we haven't previously articulated or questions might require us to like hone something that we previously articulated. So the questions, I don't really feel like, what's the thing? There's no such thing as stupid question. There's not really, it's not true that there's no such thing as a derailing question, but often people think they're derailing when they're not. But let me put it that way.
Right.
So it's all part of the same piece. And we get as much out of the questions, we get as much out of thinking about the questions and answering the questions as you do from hearing whatever that answer is. And oftentimes other people are also stimulated by the question that's being asked. So please feel free to ask questions.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, because the thing is, it's not about judging the fact that we have thinking minds and logical minds, you know. It's just that this is a practice in trying to figure out a different way of being, a new way of being. And so in doing that, we have to ask questions and we have to learn. This is always a learning experience. And that's why doing the experiential things as well as asking questions are always helpful. And writing them down, like you said, you were going to write down what you're learning here today, even, just writing them down helps stimulate all of those things between your physical body and your intellectual body and your spiritual body.
Oh, I've been taking notes.
Yes.
So where are we at 11? Are we at
18? We were going to talk about trauma.
Right. I'm just trying to check the time.
It's 4:18.
So we want to talk a little bit, my face might disappear for a minute. We want to talk a little bit about how erotic energy can be used for healing trauma. And now, one of the things that I'm really getting sort of not fascinated, not caught up in, not obsessed, something that encompasses all those things, as I start to focus on my PTSD from the car accident that I was in, and I'm trying to come up with different ways to describe. There's the incidental trauma, and not like it's incidental, not important, but like it came from an incident or a series of incidents. There's that trauma. And then there's the systemic intergenerational trauma of living lives in bodies that are marginalized by the state. So being a woman, being Black, being queer, all of those things, living with that every day, we take on trauma, not like we choose to take on trauma, but it's traumatic being in those bodies that are so heavily policed and projected upon and marginalized by the state. So there's two different types of traumas, but related. And erotic energy can be used for healing trauma. And by healing, we also have to think, what do we mean by healing? Some folks believe healing means to cure or to get over. Since I don't know if you can see me, I don't know if you can see me doing those scare quotes, get over. I am using a definition of trauma that I got from Sacred Intimate Betty Martin, where she says healing is gaining access to more of ourselves.
Wow.
Because trauma, whether it's incidental trauma or the systemic intergenerational trauma that folks living in bodies marginalized by the state, and I say it that way on purpose as opposed to saying marginalized people or marginalized bodies, because that makes it seem very passive, and our marginalization is very active, and the actor is the state, or the state and the society and the culture. So anyway, we get parts of ourselves get cut off from trauma, both the incidental trauma, and I think a train is about to come by, incidental trauma and systemic intergenerational trauma. And erotic energy can be used for healing that, for regaining access to ourselves that were taken away from us. Pleasure heals. Pleasure heals. The body wants more. The body has two modes: avoiding pain and seeking out pleasure. And so a lot of our trauma responses involve avoiding pain, but that doesn't really get us access back to those parts of ourselves. Whereas seeking pleasure, moving towards pleasure, can open ourselves up to those parts of ourselves that were cut off. The body really remembers everything. And part of the body's role is to process events that happen to us. And the process, that processing gets stored in different places of the body. When you authentically and consciously engage your mind, body, and soul in pleasurable erotic healing work, you create an opening for the pleasure to meet and to guide that pain, that guilt, that shame really out of your body, to sort of scour out the body by putting pleasure in those spaces, if that makes sense. And so activities that involve bringing erotic awareness to your energy centers, in some traditions they're called chakras, there are other names for them, and your physical body, your emotions, you bring healing to those places where trauma has constricted the energy flow, where trauma again has cut off parts of yourself from yourself. Trauma is not only living in the physical body or in the mental body, it also lives in the energy field as well. So when we're talking about trying to resolve or heal trauma, we have to think about it multidimensionally, not just physically, but also emotionally and energetically. And one of the ways to, as I said, trauma, we hold trauma in our bodies. When we engage with our erotic energy and our sexual energy, again, that's bringing pleasure to those sites in the body and moving the pain, moving the ick out by way of, not forcing, but by way of bringing in pleasure. Does that make sense? Does anyone have like questions about that? How does that work concretely? What does that mean concretely? What does that spark for you when you think about using erotic energy to heal your trauma?
I'm trying to leave some room for Carolyn in case she wants to talk, but man, it's like an
Carolyn will totally jump in.
Okay.
Carolyn is not shy about interjecting.
I had to first, so this is a context. I'm editing these videos for this Black History program at church. So I figured that I couldn't take myself off mute with Carlton Pearson in the background, so I had to mute him first. I didn't hear the question though.
Well, no, it wasn't a question per se. I was talking about trauma and erotic energy, talking about the different types of traumas that are related. The incidental, or what I'm referring to as incidental traumas, meaning they happen to individuals and they are separate from any of your identities and are traumas or events that could happen to anybody. And then there's what I'm calling systemic intergenerational trauma that comes from living in a world that basically hates us. And the more different sites of marginalization we have in our bodies, the more trauma that is inflicted upon us. So we have the trauma of being Black in a white supremacist society. We have the trauma of being women in a misogynist, sexist society. We have the trauma of trying to exist as queers in a heteronormative society. So that gets piled on. And then some of us may also have incidental traumas. We may be survivors of sexual violence. We may have, near-death experiences. And so trauma, there's ways that trauma cuts us off from parts of ourselves. And healing trauma is about regaining access to those parts that were taken away or shut down in response to that trauma. And so then we talked about how does erotic energy help to heal that trauma? it can actually bring pleasure into the body to move the ick out. The body has two basic ways it moves. It moves away, it avoids pain, and it seeks or goes towards pleasure.
I mean, I think that it also heals because it offers you compassion that you aren't receiving other places. And I think that we often ignore how healing, just like sometimes those of us who don't have partners and don't have kids and all that stuff, a lot of times the only time you do get that intimate, skin to skin contact is through erotic energy or erotic situations. So sometimes when all you really need is, to be touched because you haven't been touched or what have you. So I think that it heals it in that way. It gives you a level of compassion and empathy, even if it's through touch that a lot of times we don't often receive, especially if you're doing a lot of work out in the world with traumatized and harmed community, and you're like internalizing all that shit, and all you need is just like to relax your mind and feel like taken care of and okay. So you get that through, erotic or intimate connection, I think. Is that
Yeah. Yes. Black Harry, what do you want to say?
Well, I feel like it's an epiphany salad today, like an epiphany buffet. And really, I hadn't thought about trauma being stored in energy fields, or at least those words in sequence didn't spark that understanding in my brain. That's dope and deep. And of course, my brain immediately went into, well, with depression, with structural violence, where's all that energy stored? Where do we need to get that healed? And then I was like, come back into the point of this conversation, which is about me and my individual journey and trying to figure out where the parts of me that are cut off and how do I engage that healing. And I've heard of that sort of angled from thinking about chakras, that you do this for your chakra, you do that. That's probably the only way I've really heard of bringing an energy field and healing the body and unity with the spirit all being in the same conversation, just from my limited experience. So I find it juicy to think more about, okay, so I need to, of course, be connected to those aspects of me that are cut off, to the extent that I can be aware of it, and then figure out where in the field does that healing lie, and then what kind of pleasure can I infuse in that. That's the
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's really it. How you use the pleasure can be really individual, right? Like it could be, oh, I'm gonna have a G-spot orgasm, and I'm gonna take that energy and I'm gonna direct it to my knee, because I happen to know that when I had in this car accident, all the horrible stuff that happened during and after, all of that pain got stored in my knee. So I'm totally pulling this out of my ass, but like I'm gonna direct my orgasmic energy towards my knee. But it could also be, I'm gonna go and get a knee massage from a professional, or it could be, I'm gonna sit with my best friend and just ask them to put their hand, the person that I know that loves me, I'm gonna ask them to just put their hand on my knee. And that's pleasurable. And even if the person does not think of themselves as an energy person or even consciously aware of any of that stuff, people who love you, when they touch you, they give you healing energy. That happens automatically. Or it could be, I'm gonna get cuddled by somebody. I'm feeling, I feel it in my heart chakra. I feel conflicted there. I feel charged there. I feel choked there. So maybe I'm gonna hang out with a couple of my buddies and we're gonna like do a cuddle pile. Or maybe a bunch of us are gonna go to a sex party and sit on the couch and like mock white people.
I refuse.
So the healing can be very individual, and there's a connection between our physical body and our energetic body. And, depending on, there's various and sundry traditions that believe different things about how your energetic body is shaped, how far out it extends, blah, 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 blah. What I sort of work with is that your energetic body can extend up to 3 feet past the boundaries of your skin. Like I think we all know somebody who seems like they are 6 feet tall and really they're like 5'2", but they walk into a room and their presence.
Are you
like
talking
just
about me, M. Kali?
Of course I'm talking about you, Carolyn. Anyway, the idea behind that is that's their energetic body that's taking up all that space, right? And a lot of times folks who live in bodies marginalized by the state, it's not just our physical bodies, our energetic bodies get squished down in order to try to survive. So then how do we re-fluff, re-inflate? How do we get back the fullness of our energetic body in a society that's always trying to make us take up the least amount of space, make us be quiet, make us be the smallest versions of ourselves, which is not healthy for us. A lot of times, though, it is about survival, like physical survival. But I'm kind of coming to a place now where I'm like, we are not actually that much safer if we make ourselves smaller.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So we might as well live as big as we can.
Right.
And the other thing about living big as we can is when our energetic bodies are as full as they can be, we can hold more complexity. One of the reasons that oftentimes we shut down feeling certain things is because our bodies aren't large enough to hold it, because our energetic body has shrunk. So we think, oh, I can't feel sadness and joy at the same time. I got to make a choice. I can only feel joy or I can only feel sadness. But if our energetic containers are large enough, we can hold both of those at the same time. And life is about both of those things at the same time, joy and sadness. I could go on, but I'm going to.
Yeah. And so just to be aware of the time, it's 4:33. We started 15 minutes late. If you have time, we can go 15 minutes more, or 12 minutes more. If you are all able to do that.
I'm good with that.
Okay. Okay. All right, good. So I agree. I still, there's so much about trauma. I agree with all that you said, Mkali Hashiki. And then also there's the piece around the individual piece, like what happens to you as an individual, the individual trauma. And I think that it just even within the individual trauma itself, there lies a whole lot of different types of trauma that can come from the, systemic way that we are seen in this world, right? The systemic ways that, my sexual trauma as a child, to me, comes from the fact that we are in a patriarchal society where men just touch and do whatever they want whenever they want it, right? So that is an individual trauma that I experience, but that many experience because of the fact that we have this imbalance in our society, right? So I still have to deal with it on my own because we live in a society where we don't allow everyone to heal from it, and have everyone be held accountable for their actions, particularly in my experience, men. So, those types of things still affect the way that our trauma can heal too, and how long it takes to heal, and how we go about doing the healing work. And I agree that the cure thing, I don't see healing as necessarily a cure, but I see healing as transformation. I see healing as a way to transform the place that you once were, and to transform that energy into something powerful. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
We lost Black Cowrie.
We lost Black Cowrie. Okay. Well, and that also that also segues into using using the erotic as power and seeing the erotic as power. And it really is about, you know, creating this foundation really can, you know, it's talking about healing, but it's also about our personal power. So the more we, and this is what I believe I've been doing this for I've been doing energetic work, shamanic work for many years, massage therapy for 20 plus years, Reiki for 20 years. And I see this in all of those aspects of healing, not just in erotic healing, because I find that it's still all erotic healing. Like Kali Hashiki was saying, like the touching, the cuddling, the massaging, you know, so the more you consciously engage your senses, your breath, and your body and your mental, emotional states, the more you find that your power begins to shift when you consciously relate and align with your erotic energy, your life force energy. The way that you deal with others close to you shifts, the way that you engage in the world shifts, everything that you start to, all the exercises and activities and events that you take part in privately and in groups, prepare you to engage in the world in a different way when you start doing them in a more erotic, full-bodied, fully embodied way. So, and again, that is going to look different for each person. And like I said, the way that I do it, the way that I experience it, where I become orgasmic when I'm feeling a lot of energy inside my body, like everyone might not experience it that way. That doesn't mean that it's not happening to you. It's about what senses they engage with you, what senses that happen in your body feel joyful, feel pleasurable. And how does it feel pleasurable? In what way does it feel pleasurable to you? And it's interesting because I've seen that even in the way that when I've visited friends' churches who have the people shouting in the aisles, I see that, you know, this sort of taking over of the energy body, like the physical body with the energy body, the energy of that connection to spirit, right? And that whole body is like, you know, just giving in, giving over, and allowing like their own power and the power of the universe to like connect. And that is the way I feel when I orgasm, from pleasure, from spirit, from connection with others. And it's the way that other people may do it in different ways. So I may not shout, but I do it that way. So how do you do it? What does it look like in your body? And everyone may not know that right away, but as you start building this foundation, you'll start to see and experiment with how that looks in your own body, in your own energy field.
So the question was, what does it look like when you give over to self in your erotic experience?
That's not the question. The question is really, it's actually a statement about transforming your erotic energy into personal power. And then the question, so there is a question about how does that look to you may be different from other people. So as you start to build this foundation through your senses, through meditation, through movement, through being present, through all the things we talked about today, how will that look? You may already know how that looks, but if you don't, then utilizing all of these tools that we talked about here today, then you can begin to learn how that shows up in your energy field, how your personal power shows up using the erotic energy.
I think that for me, it shows up in if I'm in that erotic space and in my body and being vulnerable, it really shows up in if I'm turning, where we talked about turning off our brain, you know, not really paying much attention or listening to voices about, gender representation, perhaps, as far as how what erotic looks like, what erotic feels like. Once you are in that zone, it should be more about how your body feels than what others perceive of you gender-wise. So I think that's kind of how that looks for me if I'm opening up and being vulnerable. Because for me, when I'm having sex, that could be anything. Or if I'm in like an erotic or intimate situation, that could be anything. But sometimes listening to, those extra voices about, gender-wise, what you should and shouldn't be doing can, interrupt that. So I think that for me, that's what being vulnerable and letting my body go would look like or feel like.
For me, I'm sorry, I have to apologize. My computer ran out of power, and so I had to hurriedly try to get on my Android. So I know that I missed significant portions of what you talked about. I apologize for that, Maisha.
No problem.
But I'm just going to glom on to what I think I understand from what Carolyn was saying, and just say that for me, my erotic power might show up in terms of like my sense of humor, how I give off warmth when I engage people, my, I don't know, sense of confidence. I'm when I feel like I am looking cute and feeling fine, feeling all sexy, I move through the world in a different kind of warmer, sunshiny energy. I don't know how to describe it, but I'm in the direction of what you were asking, though, Maisha.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I'm feeling confident sexually, I'm more playful, jokey, teasy, engaging, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes, if you notice, like I definitely notice how I am different with the world when I'm getting it good and regularly.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question becomes for me, how do I, if I don't have a partner, if I'm not having as being sexual in that time period, I mean, I like how I engage with the world and with individuals and the world as a whole when I'm getting it good. So how do I not depend on some other person to be engaging me sexually and erotically? How do I make sure that I'm always tapped into my own erotic power so that I can stay engaged with the world in that way?
Yes.
And part of it is, whatever exercise, oh gosh, people are driving crazy. Whatever exercises you're using to tap into your erotic power, for me, I think that's one of the goals, that I don't have to depend on finding somebody else, having, that my power, that I get to take my power for myself, that I get to stimulate my own erotic energy, that I have this power, that this energy flows through me easily, and I don't have to like, oh wait, let me step aside and do some meditation and da da da. Like I get to a place where I can, oh, I'm feeling a little low today, let me tap into my erotic power. Or I know I'm going to be doing something with a whole bunch of people and I want to feel my most powerful, let me turn that switch on. And that's one of the reasons for the exercises, so that you eventually get to the place where that is not such a hard thing to access.
Right.
And it's not dependent on some other person.
Right. And it is something that also, like you're saying, not dependent on another person, but also it is something you can tap into when you're in relationship with other people, because we have relationships with other people. That's how we exist as humans in the world. So we're going to have a lot of human experience that don't feel good. We're going to have people in our lives that are going to push our boundaries. If you're in relationship like I am with a partner and with kids, that is going to try every fucking last nerve in your whole body. So having these tools is very, very helpful when you're in relationship with family, with whomever, to say, this is like, this is not bringing me joy right now. I am going to step out and do such and such, such, such. I am going to take my breaths, because I know when I breathe, when I do some anal breaths, or I breathe through my nose really quickly and do a different type of erotic breath work, I can bring myself back to center. Because I find that it's really easy, just from me being single for so long before this current partner, it was very easy for me to access this when I didn't have other humans to engage with on a regular basis, on a daily basis that you're living with. And that these kinds of tools are very, very helpful in learning how to re-engage with other human beings in very authentic ways, because a lot of times we start becoming very inauthentic. It's very easy to do that in relationship. So it's really about coming back to your authenticity, and that authenticity is my power.
This is true.
Okay, so it is 4:46. So that we're gonna have to stop
I need to go back to the.
Yeah, but I want to thank you all for being here. It's been really, really beautiful to see and hear everyone and your thoughts and ideas and epiphanies. So we are going to do this again, the virtual one.
It's on the website.
It's on the website.
It says when. So don't forget the website, Sisters Sanctuary. That's
.com.
2 S's, Sisters, and then the other S for sanctuary. So actually it's 3 S's.
Yes, and even on the website, we have the little button to donate if you want to donate from our event here today. And then the event for the event is Saturday. The next virtual salon is August 18th. Saturday, okay. August 18th.
August, September, something like that. Yeah, I knew it was
yeah.
But since you'll be on the mailing list,
yes.
We're doing quarterly mailings instead of mailing folks every month.
Mm-hmm.
We're doing quarterly mailings.
We're doing and we'll also send reminders when another one event is coming up closely, coming up soon. So May 26th is the next event if you want to come to Atlanta. Woo woo, Atlanta, come on.
And also when this I'm not sure, because I'm working with a new back end on the site. I do the website stuff. I'm working with a new back end, so I can't give you a definite date about when this will be up. But it should be. Today is Saturday, so it should be up within the week, and you'll get a little message that it's up.
Yes.
Cool. I'm looking forward to sharing it if it's okay with people to share.
It's fine to share. You won't be able to download it, but you can stream it.
Yes. Yeah. That's fun. That's fabulous.
Thank you both for having this conversation with us, for opening this space and this circle, for making it safe and warm and informative, for giving me concrete things that are specific to my individual self.
Thank you so much, both of you, for showing up.
Our pleasure. Thank you. All right. Take care, everyone. All right.
Peace.
Bye.
Peace.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You have to stop it.
So I'm going to stop recording.
Oh, leave meeting. There it is.
Wait, I'm going to stop. Don't go nowhere yet.
Okay. I'm here.
Let me figure out how to stop recording. Stop